Welcome on into the Wolverine.com podcast. Clayton Sayfie here with Chris Balas on Thursday, February 20th. Please like this video if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Head to the Wolverine.com for all of our coverage on Michigan football, basketball, recruiting, NIL, transfer portal. You can use the promo code UM1 right now for 2 months of premium access for just $1. That's UM in the numeral 1, gets you access on our message board, all of the paywalled content over at thewolverine.com. And again, if you want Michigan to beat Michigan State on Friday night, like this video, hit the thumbs up button. We got to get to 350 likes on this video if you want the Wolverines to beat the Spartans. If you don't, then don't like it. But if you do, then give us that thumbs up. We're going to start with some Michigan football. Then we'll get to Michigan basketball against Michigan State, break the game down, give our predictions or how we see this game going. But we will start on the football side with Chip Lindsey, Michigan's new offensive coordinator. He joined John Jansen on the In the Trenches podcast this week and kind of talked about his vision for the offense, what brought him to Michigan. Talked a little bit of Bryce Underwood, Mikey Keene, some of the quarterbacks, what his plan is going to be. Of course, he's also Michigan's quarterbacks coach this year. And, you know, a lot of these conversations you get, you know, kind of the same jargon, you know, we want to be balanced, explosive, that sort of thing. Our vision aligned, him and Sharon Moore. But there was some insight into what Chip Lindsey's vision is with this offense. And a couple of the points that stood out to me were, okay, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We won the national championship here in 2023. He said he wanted to be at a place that has a chance to win the whole thing, to win every game. He said this is one of these places. And, you know, I think he's going to mix kind of what he's done in the past with what Sharon Moore has done with this Michigan offense. He said, I love how we approach the game here. I love what our DNA is here. We're tough, physical. I think that'll continue to carry over. Later on, he said, our goal is to have the most physical and explosive offense in the country. That's what our mantra is. John Jansen, of course, an offensive lineman, wanted to know this. He said, hey, does the run set up the pass or does the pass set up the run? Kind of the age-old question. And I think John was probably happy to hear Chip Lindsey say, hey, the run sets up the pass. He said 10 years ago, maybe I would have said the opposite. But so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Of course, we want to see it ourselves. But, you know, I think that, you know, kind of meshing what he's done with what Michigan is probably the way to go. And he's right. I mean, things have worked with the way Michigan's done it outside of last season.
Yeah, I'll tell you, two things that impressed me about him. Number one, his humility, right? He's not one of these guys that comes in here and like, I know what I'm doing. I've been around forever and this and that. And you don't question me, so on and so forth. I think he is genuinely excited to be at a place like Michigan. And that's the kind of guy that you want here. Now, that works both ways, right? I think there are a lot of guys who, if they aren't qualified, obviously are going to be happy to be here too and say, okay, but he's more than qualified. This is a guy, in my opinion, after digging into his resume a little bit more, you look at it and say, okay, this is a really, really good hire. You didn't win the press conference, maybe. Everybody's like, what, Chip Lindsey? You know, and he's not one of the top 5, 6 names on the list, or, you know, doesn't have this unbelievable resume of.
Did they win the podcast, though?
Right. I thought he did. I thought he was great. So, and John Jansen always asks great questions, man. Jansen's as good as it gets. He's a good friend and just a professional. So, but he wasn't going to come here and say, yeah, we're going to completely scrap things and go speed and space and all that garbage. You know, that Josh Gaddis was talking about, for example. He's going to he understands that the way Sharon Moore wants to win, and he has a plan to execute that while improving the passing game and improving explosive plays. Because remember, we heard a lot of this last spring too about explosive plays and everything else. And God, did they have one pass over 30 yards or something like that last year? It was ridiculous. So, but he's clearly got a vision. He is clearly a great football mind, a great offensive mind. Now it's just a matter of, does he have the horses to do it? I think he's going to have the quarterback eventually. They got to get some more receivers, and it really, again, still starts up front. Michigan's really got to develop a good offensive line to make it work.
Totally agree. And that's one of the question marks on this team. Not only who's your 5, but who's your next 5. And, you know, I mean, a couple of years ago, they were about 8, 9, 10 deep, you know, probably closer to 10 than 8. And last year was maybe 7, but it wasn't even that good at the top. And this year, I see even less numbers in terms of proven commodities. We'll see if guys can emerge, but I mean that's going to be big. I think you have some good running backs. I like the tight end room. I think it's solid. And then like you said, the quarterbacks kind of wait and see in terms of like how ready is Bryce Underwood. We'll talk about him in a second. What is Mikey Keene transferring up to this level? Of course, he has familiarity with Chip Lindsey, having worked under him at UCF in 2022. And Davis Warren obviously injured and probably missed the start of the season. So you have that. You have the offensive line. It's two of the most important position groups on the field. But I do think probably his run game roots are a little underrated. He talked a lot about his time with Todd Monken at Southern Miss, I believe, and Todd Monken, now the offensive coordinator with the Baltimore Ravens, kind of took over for Greg Roman a couple of years ago and has kind of put his own touches on what is an incredible Baltimore Ravens run game. Of course, doesn't hurt to have Lamar and Derrick Henry there, but kind of operating that. And then also his time with Gus Malzahn, who's a very creative offensive mind and has had really good run games in the past. He mentioned, we had 1 year, we had a 1,500-yard rusher and a 3,000-yard passer. So those are things that you certainly want Michigan to be able to replicate under Chip Lindsey. Quarterbacks-wise was, kind of interesting. I think we all know like how good of a talent Bryce Underwood is, how athletic he is. I mean, just see him walking around, you can just tell how good of an athlete he is. But I think two of the words that stood out to me were humble and driven is how Chip Lindsey described Bryce Underwood. He said he's going to coach all the quarterbacks the same, that they're all going to have to be responsible to learn the protections, things like that. But they're going to put them in good situations. He said, they want to be able to get the ball to their playmakers, which that's kind of one of those question marks, right? Where I'm like, all right, well, what are these playmakers? But said they'll all get an equal amount of reps early on in spring practice.
Yeah, and the one thing about everything we've heard about Bryce Underwood is that his teammates love him.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not coming in here like some prima donna, like I'm the number one player in the country and I got my money and so on and so forth. He's exactly the opposite, which makes him a great fit at Michigan and the kind of teammate that they're exactly looking for. It reminds you of J.J. McCarthy, right? In a lot of ways, who was probably the humblest superstar that I've ever seen at Michigan, and that's saying something, right? Because there have been quite a few. A lot of guys played with an edge. J.J. McCarthy only cared about two things: winning and his teammates, right? Of course, he wanted to get he would have loved to have more the stats and stuff. We remember after that game where they ran 32 times in a row against Penn State, and he asked Sharon Moore, "Don't you trust me?" And Sharon told him, "I absolutely trust you. I didn't trust your protection that day, right?" So you're going to always have that in a quarterback. But this is a guy. Just look at his picture here. If you're just listening and you can't see the pictures of this kid, what a specimen, right? He's got every tool, and I think at least probably by halfway through the year, he's the starting quarterback, maybe from game one, depending on how Mikey Keene plays. You might want to go with that experience on the road. Mikey Keene's a winner too, and I think that's what a lot of people are failing to recognize here is that, well, he's only 5'11" or 6 feet tall, and he doesn't have the huge arm, and he's not Bryce Underwood, but he's got that experience, and he's won a lot of games and been in a lot of different situations. So if you go to Oklahoma, right, that is a great piece to have, even if Bryce Underwood is going to play, which he is. I think Bryce Underwood plays from the get-go. As somebody in the building told me, follow the money when I asked who would the starting quarterback be from game one. So, but to me, he's going to have a lot of success running the ball too. Here's a guy that is big enough and physical enough to take some hits, and you have to use that as a weapon. I didn't think they used J.J. McCarthy enough in that respect, but they did what they had to do to win a national championship, so I'm not complaining that much. I think Bryce Underwood is a special talent who you are going to see have great success with his arms and his legs, and that Chip Lindsey is a guy who knows how to use that.
I think one of the things with J.J. McCarthy is it felt like every time he took a hit, he'd get up and kind of be limping or, a little off balance. And I think that scared them given what the backup quarterback situation was. I think if Bryce Underwood comes in, speaking to your point on Mikey Keene, whether he's the starter or whether he kind of has a role off the bench, which I think he will, even if he doesn't win the starting job, you can run him, and I think you feel a little bit more confident about who the next guy is in there, which would be Mikey Keene.
Right.
The concern to me about Mikey Keene is the one knock on him is how he deals with pressure, and Michigan's offensive line doesn't look like it's going to be as good. Bryce Underwood, more mobile, might give him a leg up in terms of, kind of similar to when Michigan played, not that it's going to be like this every game. Michigan played Georgia in the Orange Bowl, and one of the reasons why J.J. McCarthy started taking all the snaps is because they couldn't protect, and they needed somebody who could at least make a guy miss. I think Underwood could bring that to the table.
Yeah, and I'm disappointed so far with the offensive line additions, and I understand it's not going to be fixed overnight, but it can be, right, in the portal. So you had some big time whiffs at positions that I thought really with players that really could have helped this team. Now the other side of that is you have some experience coming back, and if guys like Gio El-Hadi plays to his potential, Greg Crippen's a 5th-year guy, so maybe he ups his game another notch. But I really thought that they needed 2 or 3, and I don't think the guys that they brought in are going to be difference makers. I think that they are depth pieces at this point. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, and I hope I am, but extremely concerned about the left tackle position, right? I like Evan Link on the inside. I think Andrew Sprague will be fine. Plus on the right side at right tackle. And but from there, there are a lot of question marks. And did they get the most out of these guys last year? We keep saying that. People get mad at us for criticizing, when we think somebody didn't do a great job coaching or whatever. And but I don't think there's anybody that would argue that offensive line didn't reach its potential last year, and for various reasons. And the buck stops with the coaches. And Sharon Moore is a great offensive line coach. We know that. Is he going to have to be more hands-on? Is that why they brought Juan Castillo in? And again, this is nothing personal against Grant Newsom, and maybe he'll prove us wrong and he can shove it in our face the way that Wink Martindale shoved it in Angelique's face on the field after the Alabama game. You still think I blitzed too much, right? Or something like that,
When she had never written that once.
Exactly, she had not. It wasn't her that it was really aimed at. He was speaking generally, probably to some of her colleagues at a different paper, if we're being honest. So, but that's I would love nothing more than for Grant Newsom to say, okay, come up to me and say, hey, screw you, look at us, we dominated. We were in the Joe Moore running again, and even though I think weren't they like a quarterfinalist or a top 12 for the Joe Moore last year, if I'm not mistaken, or was it?
I don't think so.
Okay, I hope not. I didn't think so either, but yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and look at that. But regardless, that's where it starts to me, and that's why I'm going to continue to beat that drum, because good offense starts up front, and I still think Michigan's lacking in a few positions there.
Could it have been losing your top 6 offensive linemen, and there's a reason why you brought in some of those transfers to start over the guys who were backups that became starters?
Yeah, but Josh Preeb underachieved, right? And speaking to people really close to it, they're like, man, that was, and again, I don't want to calling people out, but man, we had higher expectations of him. Gio El-Hadi, we've seen him play better football than he played last year. There were times that he completely looked lost. So Greg Crippen kind of was what he was, has been his entire career, but you're waiting for some of these guys to take that next step. Fundamentally sound and technique is what you're looking for. We're not looking for example, Andrew Vistardis, right? Got the most out of his talent. In my opinion, he wasn't going to be Olu Atimi, but this is a guy where you knew that you could count on him and that he was going to be in the right place and do the right thing and take the right steps. Sometimes he got physically overwhelmed in that Georgia game. It comes to mind. I remember when he was pulling it and it looked like he hit a brick wall one time. But that's what I'm looking for in terms of improvement. And then the wide receivers too. We haven't even talked about the wide receivers, right? I do know for a fact, and we'll talk about this in tomorrow's Inside the Fort, that they are still looking at that position and on the offensive line as well. And you can, as we've seen late in the spring portal, get some guys who can make a difference. So to me, that's going to be the key between a really good year, if the defense is what we expect it to be, Clay, and a good year.
Definitely. And as Chip Lindsey said, and having a good defense is offensive coordinator's dream. And I think Wink Martindale would say the same thing, and probably in an honest moment be like, all right, let's get a little more out of this offense. But man, the fact that they found a way to win the end of last year with essentially no offense is pretty incredible. And I think that's why Wink Martindale is comfortable being like, hey, screw everybody. We did it regardless of who we had on the field, guys that opted out, this and that. It was really remarkable to watch at the end of the season. But they need more out of the offense. If you're going to do it for 15, 16, 17 games, if you're going to be able to play that amount of contests next year, you're going to need more out of the offense. So, and Chip Lindsey talked a lot about how spring ball is more like rolling the balls out there, seeing who's who. He didn't want to watch too much film on last year of what guy is this and what guy does that well. He kind of wants a clean slate. I think probably some of those offensive guys will welcome that, especially with better quarterback play.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, that's what it takes for some of these guys to step up. And then you have the guys that were underclassmen that are motivated, like Fred Moore. When I talked to him after the bowl game saying, I'm going to do everything I can this offseason to put myself in position. I'm going to work as hard as possible, stick around. And he wants to get 1,000 yards and win a national championship. I don't blame him for aiming high, in kind of reaching for some of those high, lofty goals. So some guys could emerge that didn't have big seasons last year, but it'll be interesting. And we are under a month away until spring practices begin. They announced last week spring game April 19th on Big Ten Network noon. And as someone said, that's a later end of the spring game, but it'll still be like, 25 degrees and like a mist in the air. And
I hope not.
That's how it goes. I hope not too.
Holy Saturday, right? I believe
it is Holy Saturday.
Yep. Easter Sunday weekend. It'll be interesting to see what kind of a crowd they have there. But
yeah,
I've been to some spring games when it was 50 degrees and sunny, and it was absolutely beautiful. So, and those are the best, right? When you're out there sitting there, and it's still Michigan football, so it's still fun to watch.
Oh, yeah.
And we're in the press box now, so I can't really talk. But I have sat out there when it's been chillier, and but regardless, just to see. Compared to, for example, what you're seeing at Ohio State, the flag football game and stuff like that. You're seeing some hitting out there, and Sharon Moore believes in playing a game, and obviously you hope that nobody gets hurt. But I can't wait to see the way some of these position battles play out, to see how some of these bodies look, right? These guys, if they've added the good weight. Andrew Sprague comes to mind. Blake Frazier is a guy who, if he gets bigger and stronger and he gets healthy, could be a contributor on the offensive line this year. We've heard good things about him. So, and how that line comes together. So that's what I'll be watching. And of course, Bryce Underwood, right? But you can't take too much from the spring either, as we've seen in the past. Guys have had huge games where, you look at Ben Hall, right? We all thought, okay, wow, this guy, something else. And has yet to live up to his lofty spring game, the expectations he set with his good spring game. So, but how the passing game looks, how much different the offense looks, even though we know they aren't going to give everything away. How much more in terms of RPOs are we going to see? Things like that. So, things that we'll pick up from inside the building too as we go on. But I can't wait. It's funny how fast it comes, especially. Last year was like the turnaround after the national championship season. Boom, they were done, and then all of a sudden they're starting up again. A little bit longer this time around, but still the same anticipation.
9 days longer, 9 days. But we had college football all the way till January 20th, and I think Ryan Day said that's partly why they're dialing back their spring game. But they already didn't even tackle last year,
right?
And I will say, like, Sharon Moore has the mentality part of being the head coach now, where like he knows what he wants his program to be. He's like, yeah, we're going to tackle and hit in the spring game. We may not play all our starters the whole time. Like last season, you saw maybe a drive or two for some of the guys who were really established. Obviously, those guys don't even probably need a spring ball, some of them. And you hold them out when it comes to a spring game type of situation. But, the way they battled and rallied at the end of last season as well, like he's got, the identity part, the mentality part down. It doesn't help when you have some good leaders like a Max Bredesen who help rally those guys as well in the buy-in week late in last year. But it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun that some of those guys are back, that we'll get to see some of those new faces, that I'm gonna fall in love with some freshman or sophomore's game and be like, this guy's gonna be an impact player, and then he'll transfer to Purdue after next year, like Breon Ishmael.
Right.
Breon Ishmael was my guy during last year's spring game. I mean, he made some nice plays, but you can't take too much from it, although it is more fun. And when you got a podcast, you kind of got to do it. Yep. But you can't take too little. Like when it was John O'Korn and Wilton Spate going at it, and you're like, okay, it's vanilla offense, it's spring. It's like, I don't know. O'Korn is, he kind of is what he was in that game, but no, it's going to be fun. It's going to.
So your spring game player of the of the spring is like the Sports Illustrated cover jinx, is what you're telling me.
Oh yeah,
So okay.
100%. Like if you're a Michigan football player listening, which I don't know why you would be doing this,
Yeah.
you do not want to hear me like raving about you on April
They're like
22nd.
Clay, don't no. And you know what? And there are spring game. Elaine Kashima for the old timers. Well, Grady Brooks. We always revert. This is even before you were born, I think, in the '90s. The Grady Brooks Award for the guy that everybody had the best spring, and then you saw him 2 or 3 plays in a game. So you're gonna
Mason
have those
Graham worked
guys.
out. Mason
Mason
Graham's
Graham
around.
did okay. That you could tell that there was something different about him, and it was when he was going toe to toe with some of the best linemen, off Michigan offensive linemen on that line. And I said, okay. I remember texting Jansen in the box in Karsh and saying, "Am I wrong in thinking that Mason Graham has a chance to be an absolute stud here and maybe the best freshman tackle we've ever seen here?" And he agreed with me, and he absolutely was. Mason Graham was an absolute stud. So this defensive line is going to be good. Again, I think people are. I don't think anybody's thinking that the next Mason Graham is on this line, but I saw great things from Rayshawn Benny and the other guys they have coming in that they've added. Damon Payne. I think this team is going to be extremely tough to run on, and I think those edges, TJ Guy and Derek Moore, are going to be really, really good too. So I love this defense. I love the fact that Wink Martindale. I hate to say it, Wink, but I'm really glad you didn't get a job selfishly because you're coming back here, and what he accomplished last year was nothing short of amazing.
This will transition us to basketball because Wink Martindale sitting maybe
Mm.
by himself, maybe with another coach at the Purdue basketball game, wearing the same exact thing he coaches in, just sitting there, was like the best thing I saw other than the game that night. I guess that
And
was
didn't
pretty
wash it. And didn't wash it.
probably.
So
I mean, no, he's probably got like 15 of those like cut off
right.
hoodies with like the white tight
Yep.
shirt underneath in the skinny M hat, and it's
Yeah.
just funny. He's just always the same guy. I'm excited to talk to Wink again this spring here and cover him for another season because that was entertaining last year.
Mm-hmm.
That transitions us to basketball. Let's preview Michigan against Michigan State. There he is. There he
The
is
man,
on the screen.
the legend, the OG. Yeah,
I think
next to a miserable Purdue fan up there in the stands. So love it.
and he was cheering and getting into it. Sharon Moore he'll probably be there tomorrow. He at some of the games he's booing the refs and things like that. I love it. Those guys are
Yeah.
into it and having a good time supporting each other and those two programs. Obviously, a lot of dialogue between the two. We got Michigan State, 8:05 p.m. on Fox tomorrow. Jason Benetti, Robbie Hummel, Bill Raftery on the call. That's as good as it gets. All-star crew. Michigan a 2.5-point favorite. Over under 151.5. This is the 8th top 15 matchup between the two teams since the turn of the century. A lot on the line. First place in the Big Ten. You remain there if you're Michigan with a win. You get there, with a half-game lead if you're Michigan State and come in and get a victory.
Yeah, it's gonna be a tough one. I think Michigan State's playing good ball. It's funny because when everybody after they lost to Indiana at home and everybody puts the next five, well, they might not win another one. And I can't tell you how many times we've seen that over the years where then all of a sudden Michigan State pulls out 2 big wins and they're back. Tom Izzo is a good basketball coach. We can say whatever we want to about him, but he has a way of motivating his team and the pride in the program that, okay, he knows which buttons to push to get these guys back on track. And this team is a better as a sum of its parts than the individuals, and those are usually teams that perform really well under Tom Izzo. They've all bought in to what he's preaching. They've got some good young pieces, so it's going to be. I'm still not sure how they match up with Michigan. That's going to be the interesting part. Michigan's going to have to lean on Vlad Golden a little bit more. Michigan State's not going to double much, right? They're going to dig, but they're not going to double much, and it's going to be, I think, a big man's game. Are they going to try to take Danny Wolf out of the game and then let their guards man up with Trey Donaldson and take their chances? Trey Donaldson's got to have a good game tomorrow night. I really believe that. So you can't turn the ball over, right? You got to get back on defense, transition defense, and you got to keep these guys off the glass. And I think they'll have a good chance to win. So, but this is an athletic team that is when it gets in the lane and gets to the rim, draws fouls, which they're going to do, then they are tough to beat. So I wouldn't be surprised at all, Clay, if we see some of that zone defense that Indiana threw at them and some different looks on defense to confuse them. Can't be giving up those lobs over the top like Purdue did and let these guys get to the rim and expect to win this game.
Yeah, the weak side defense for Purdue was nowhere to be found. Michigan
Yeah,
State had 10 dunks, which is unheard of. Some of them in transition. Of course, that speaks to the point about the top two things on the scouting report are what you need to stop are the two staples of Tom Izzo teams, which is they're going to run, make or miss, and they're going to crash the offensive glass. They right now are number one in the Big Ten, rebounding 36.8% of their own missed shots. They draw more fouls than anybody in the league. They score 30.3 points per game on fast breaks, which is 17.1, and second chance opportunities, 13.2. So they have just always found these ways to be able to score those kind of hidden points, not in the half court game. And they're pretty good there too, but not as good because they can't shoot as well. But when they can run and crash the offensive glass, it's really hard to stop. And I think, depending on what kind of whistle each team gets tomorrow night, that's going to determine a lot of how this team goes or this game goes. I think that Michigan has to be really smart with its scouting report. I thought Purdue did surprisingly a poor job at that.
agree.
There were some times when guys closed out too far on a non-shooter and then they get past him. And it just felt like Purdue was kind of out of sorts defensively and got frustrated probably because their offense just wasn't clicking as well as it usually does.
Yep.
But you got to be smart with the scouting report. And the interesting thing that Kyle Church, Michigan's assistant coach, mentioned when we talked to him on Wednesday was, like they play 10 guys and we switch 1 through 4. So all of our guys are going to be matched up at one point or another with potentially 7, 8 guys in this game. So you got to be able to make these quick decisions on the fly. Oh, this guy I don't close out too far on. This guy I do have to get out on. If it's Jaden Akins, coming off of like a flare screen or something like that, it's going to be a challenge. Not that Michigan State hasn't had, some games where their offense just flatlines because they can't shoot, because those have happened. USC game, they played some junk defense. The Indiana game you mentioned, Michigan State scores 0.89 points per possession against the zone. I thought Illinois, they went under everything and kind of dared them to shoot, sagged off. But then I thought Michigan State got a little pretty comfortable. No pressure on the ball at all. They're kind of able to operate. So you got to find the right balance there. And like you said, I'd imagine Michigan pulls out the zone, mixes it up, especially in the second half. And, is it one of these weird games like Tom Izzo would lament it if an opponent had this happen where, they hit 7, 8 threes when they don't normally make threes or something like that. Anything could happen in a game like this.
Yeah, that's the thing. And there are going to be outliers. And if there are some from Michigan, Tom Izzo's going to let us know about it in the post game. Well, we left him open because he can't shoot. Reuben Jones, if Reuben Jones hits 2 or 3 threes, right? Well, that's just or Xavier Simpson. So back in the day. So maybe LJ Kaysen, right? I could see that happening because I think he's going to play a little bit more. I wouldn't surprise me at all to see Fat on the floor, Clayton, for a stretch because Michigan State's so deep. Maybe you give them, 2-3 minutes at the end of a stretch, heading into a timeout or something like that to play some defense and give some guys some rest. But it's going to be a war because there are two things here. Michigan State, the hatred they have for Michigan is pretty well documented. Every player that we talked to from Michigan yesterday talked about seeing it on social media and the taunts and everything else. And that is something that is really, that Michigan State's going to treat this like the season because it kind of is, right? If they lose this game, they're almost, I'm not going to say they're out of the Big Ten race, but 2 back with 5 to play, then you're probably playing for a share. You do get Michigan in the last game of the year, so that helps. But got a home game with Wisconsin, who's playing as well as anybody in the Big Ten. So and Michigan still has a tough schedule too. Let's be clear, but Michigan State's going to treat this one like their season. Michigan's got to match their intensity. The interesting thing to me, and I asked all these guys about it, and I'm writing an article about it here in about 15 minutes, is that none of these guys, other than maybe Roddy Gale and potentially Trey Donaldson, who you see here, have really played in those rivalry games, right? That this big time rivalry game, other than Ohio State on the road. So the intensity is going to be ramped up 10 times over that game, even in Columbus. This is going going to be a war. It will be fun in some ways, and it's one of those where you're always happy when it's over, in my opinion. And then you can move on, and you don't have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. And even John Beeline was talking about this on the Huge Show earlier in the week, and John Beeline will be in the house for Michigan State on Friday night. He was saying, Michigan's got all new guys. They got to understand the intensity of this game and how it's vicious in a good way in terms of the crowd, and that viciousness will be on their side in this game. But he was talking about both matchups in general. So when they go to East Lansing to end the regular season, and something that he always used to talk about too is just like you got to just play the game and not play to the crowd necessarily. Like you don't need to and Michigan does shoot a decent percentage, especially Namari and Donaldson on some deep threes and things, but you just got to be smart and not play to drop the hammer and make sure that the crowd goes crazy, and just make the smart play. And understand too that Cohen Carr, who's dunked 45 times this year, in some of these Michigan State guys, may have a highlight reel play. It's 2 points. It's 2 damn points,
Yep. As Beeline used to say in the locker room.
Yeah.
They had some great dunks, didn't they? But guess what? Yeah. They lost. Yeah.
They're going to win the highlight reel potentially. And Michigan's got some highlight reel type of players too.
Yep.
But you just got to make sure you come out there with a win by 1 or more. And I think that Danny Wolf is just a big key in this game. Like you mentioned, maybe they try to take him out of it. I think he has done a better job lately of adjusting to the different coverages he's getting. And does Michigan State, they play 2 bigs. I think Jackson Kohler and those guys will be, provide some resistance when he gets down low, but are they kind of quick enough to hang with him? And if he could knock down a 3 or 2, if he is given space by some of those bigger guys that kind of want to back off, I just think the way Danny Wolf plays in this game is going to be huge for. It's not a hot take because it's kind of been their identity lately, but it's just going to be huge for determining what the outcome is going to be.
And they need Mad Vlad from the outset, right? He can't wait until the second half or down the stretch to take over this game. We've seen Hunter Dickinson have huge games against Michigan State in the past, right? I think this could be a game where you go inside a little bit more to him and you get some really good looks at 2s. And if he steps up like he did earlier in the year, then we're looking at a really positive outcome for Michigan, in my opinion.
Prediction time, since we put prediction on the thumbnail of the video, so we have to.
You go first.
I will go first. I came up with this before I saw the spread, and I have Michigan by 3. The spread 2.5. So I guess I have Michigan covering the 3-point spread. I think it's going to come right down to the wire. I think, and like you said, we'll know a lot more obviously after watching these 2 teams play. Like going into the game Michigan played against Purdue, the first one, I was like, I think Michigan matches up decently well with their personnel and, kind of got size advantage. And then, but after that game and even after the second one, it's like, I don't think Michigan matches up very well, but they were able to gut out a win.
Yeah.
I don't know who has the better matchup in this game overall. I think Michigan State with their fresh bodies. And like you said, maybe they sub a little more. Fat Brooks comes in because Michigan State against Purdue, they have Holloman on Braden Smith for 20 minutes and they had Fears on Braden Smith for 20 minutes. And Braden Smith played 39 minutes.
Yep.
And he was a little helter-skelter and didn't play his game. And Michigan State just kind of keeps throwing guys at you and keeps playing with as much energy as possible. No one in that game, their biggest game of the year, played more than 29 minutes because that's what they do. They rotate. And the downside would be you don't have all the depth in the world. You don't have all the go-to guys. And, that's depth. Is it really good? Is it a bad thing? But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I do think that Michigan is able to gut out a close win in this one.
What do you think for score? What is it going to take to win this game? How many points?
I think I got 72-69.
Yeah, that's about right. I always think it's 74-72 or something like that. So Michigan State's very good defensively. So hopefully Michigan gets some good looks in transition too. So it's going to be a fascinating game. It's going to be a great environment. It's not going to be isn't going to be as much green in there as we saw in the past, obviously, because when Michigan is a good team, their fans don't sell out. And when I say sell out, they don't give their tickets to their Michigan State friends, which is unacceptable, frankly. So it's going to be a great atmosphere. Got to get there early. And to me, it's just one of those that you can't wait for.
Is Michigan going to be able to get, are they going to want to make this a half-court game or are they going to want to run?
I think both, right? I mean, you're going to
Yeah,
want to run on offense. Obviously,
sure.
you're going to have to run on defense and get back. Otherwise, you're going to get scorched. You cannot give points up in transition, and you cannot turn the ball over against this team and let them get out if you want to win this basketball game.
I agree. And I
Yep.
think Michigan could, take advantage of them. You got to get the board, but once you do, and they're crashing a bunch of bodies in there, Michigan likes to run, especially if Donaldson's playing well. I think that's obviously another key. If your point guard plays well, hot take, you'll have a better chance of winning. But they can get some of those buckets too and kind of even it out a little bit because Michigan State will get some. Then I think that could go a long way. But it's going to be fun on Friday night at Chrysler. Should be an electric environment. And we'll see what happens. And obviously we'll talk about it on Monday. Michigan with a short turnaround after that. They go to Nebraska on Monday night. But stay tuned for all your coverage of Michigan football, basketball, recruiting over at thewolverine.com. You can use the promo code UM1 for 2 months of premium access for just $1. Like the video if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel, and we'll see everyone next time.